In the months leading up to that fateful day, tensions between the United States and Saudi Arabia had reached an unprecedented boiling point. Washington's relentless criticism of Riyadh's policies, especially regarding human rights and energy strategy, echoed through every corridor of power in Washington. The White House had demanded that Saudi Arabia ramp up its oil production to bring global prices down, but the kingdom, steeped in its own pride and strategic interests, refused to yield. The situation took an even darker turn when a controversial bill proposing sanctions against Riyadh was introduced in the U.S. Congress. In response, Saudi officials abruptly canceled several scheduled meetings with American diplomats, signaling a clear shift in the kingdom's posture. It was amidst this charged atmosphere that I found myself covering one of the most dramatic episodes of modern diplomacy. I remember the moment I learned that U.S. Ambassador Richard Hall was urgently summoned to the palace of Prince Faisal, the younger brother of the king, and, in effect, the second most powerful figure in the land. Ambassador Hall was a seasoned diplomat, known for his calm and measured responses even under the most intense pressure. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead. Upon his arrival at the sprawling palace, Ambassador Hall was escorted through long, opulent corridors that exuded both grandeur and an undercurrent of tension. Every step echoed the deep-seated discord that now defined U.S. Saudi relations. Finally, he was led into a vast, austere reception hall where Prince Faisal awaited him, his face inscrutable and coolly indifferent. "Mr. Hall, I presume you understand why we are here," the prince said in a tone that brooked no argument. His measured, almost chilling delivery set the stage for the encounter that was to follow. Trying to steady his nerves, Ambassador Hall replied, "Your Highness, I have come in a spirit of dialogue, to seek mutual understanding and find a path forward despite our differences." His voice, though composed, betrayed the gravity of the moment. A slight, ironic smile played on Prince Faisal's lips as he countered, "Mutual understanding? Your Congress threatens sanctions. Your president speaks of reassessing cooperation, and your media portrays us as a menace to global stability. How can there be any common ground under such circumstances?" Those words hit Hall like a blow. He struggled to formulate a response, his diplomatic training clashing with the stark reality of the prince's challenge. "We do not wish confrontation," he began cautiously, "but our concerns for stability and fairness in this relationship compel us to speak frankly." The prince cut him off sharply. "Your concerns are of no consequence to us. We are not your subordinates. We are partners, but on our terms, not yours." His tone left no room for negotiation, and in that moment, it was abundantly clear that the balance of power was shifting. I stood there, absorbing every word, knowing that this meeting was far from routine. It was a turning point, an unmistakable signal that Saudi Arabia was no longer willing to be dictated to by American demands. Ambassador Hall's eyes reflected both determination and the dawning realization that the old order was crumbling. Ambassador Hall left the palace with a heavy heart, burdened by the weight of the unfolding crisis. Every step he took through those opulent halls resonated with the echo of a new era dawning, a time when pride, sovereignty, and shifting alliances would redefine global power. As I documented this historic encounter, I knew that the events of that day would be dissected for years to come, marking the beginning of a turbulent journey with far-reaching consequences for the world order. In the wake of that fateful palace meeting, the atmosphere in Riyadh had shifted dramatically, and I could sense that the world of diplomacy was about to be rewritten. Ambassador Richard Hall, burdened by the weight of Prince Faisal's icy declaration, "You will leave our country. Your government must realize that Saudi Arabia determines its own destiny," stepped out of the grand corridors with a heavy heart and a mind racing with uncertainty. The opulent halls, once filled with the promise of dialogue, now seemed to echo with the finality of a severed bond. I followed closely as Hall navigated the marble corridors, his every step resonating with both resignation and a lingering hope that a compromise might still be salvaged. Outside, The desert twilight cast long shadows over the palace's ornate facade, a symbolic reminder that darkness was falling not just over the kingdom, but over an era of unchallenged American influence. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the news of the ambassador's expulsion sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. In urgent meetings at the White House, officials clashed over the implications of this bold move. "Have they lost their minds?" roared the Secretary of State, his anger palpable as he slammed his fist onto a polished conference table. An international relations advisor, his face grave and lined with worry, murmured, "This is not merely a diplomatic snub. It is a clear assertion of independence that could redraw global alliances." As the crisis deepened, whispers of Saudi Arabia forging stronger ties with China and Russia began to circulate among seasoned diplomats and policymakers alike. In a subsequent closed-door meeting with his top advisors, Prince Faisal outlined a strategy that was as daring as it was unapologetic. "We will no longer tolerate being treated as subordinates," he declared firmly. "Our destiny is ours to command, and we shall build alliances that respect our sovereignty and our ambitions." His words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sent a ripple of resolve through the room. Back in Washington, panic mounted as economic analysts predicted dire consequences. Rumors of a potential oil deal in yuan or rubles sent shockwaves through financial markets, threatening to upend the global order. The nation's top officials scrambled to craft a response, debating between the imposition of harsher sanctions and the possibility of covert negotiations to rein in the escalating crisis. Every decision and strategy session was fraught with the anxiety of a world teetering on the brink of a new geopolitical era. As I documented these unfolding events, I could not shake the feeling that we were witnessing a seismic shift in international relations. Every conversation I recorded, every whispered strategy in dimly lit conference rooms, carried the weight of impending change. In a late-night press briefing in Washington, a senior advisor confided, "This is more than a diplomatic incident. It is a turning point that will redefine our global influence for generations." Such words underscored the urgency and profound uncertainty gripping the corridors of power. The world was watching, and history was in the making. The phone call for Washington had barely ended when a sense of irreversible change swept over Riyadh. I could feel it in the charged air of the palace corridors and in the determined eyes of those who had gathered to witness history in the making. The message was clear. The United States was now at a crossroads, and the outcome of this crisis would redefine global alliances. After the tense conversation, I managed to catch up with several aides of Prince Faisal as they hurried through the hallways. One of them confided in a low tone. The prince's words were like a final decree. He made it clear, the days of American dominance here are over. The atmosphere was a mix of pride and defiance, yet underscored by an unmistakable air of inevitability. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the fallout was equally dramatic. I listened as an advisor on international relations recounted the frantic scramble inside the White House. "We are witnessing a monumental shift," he said, his voice heavy with apprehension. The prince's ultimatum has not only sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community, but has also rattled our strategic foundations. The question now is, can we salvage our influence, or will we be forced to accept a new world order? The news reverberated through every major news outlet, with analysts debating the implications for global energy markets and the balance of power. Economic pundits warned of severe disruptions if Saudi Arabia followed through with its newfound independence, potentially moving away from the dollar in favor of currencies like the yuan or the ruble. Every headline screamed of uncertainty, and the tension in Washington grew with every passing hour. In Riyadh, the tone among the palace staff was resolute. I managed to record a brief but telling conversation between two aides in the corridors outside Prince Faisal's private chamber. "He believes we have nothing to lose," one whispered. "Our alliances with China and Russia are only going to strengthen. We have the power now." Their words resonated with a confident finality that underscored the dramatic pivot in international relations. As the day wore on, Prince Faisal himself made a brief appearance at a press briefing held in a private room. His expression was calm, yet his eyes conveyed a steely determination. Today marks a turning point, he stated firmly. Saudi Arabia will no longer be a pawn. We choose our partners, and we set our own terms. Let be known, our future is in our hands. His voice, measured and unwavering, left no room for misinterpretation. Every word he uttered was dissected by pundits and echoed in the corridors of power in Washington. The call for American intervention had lost its urgency, replaced by the stark reality that Riyadh was charting its own course. In that moment, I realized that we were not merely observing a diplomatic spat. We were witnessing the dismantling of a long-held order. As I wrapped up my notes for the day, the significance of these events settled in. This was not just a crisis between two nations. It was the catalyst for a seismic realignment in global politics. The finality of Prince Faisal's words reverberated in my mind as I stepped away from the palace, aware that the world would never be the same again. Washington was in turmoil. The shock of Saudi Arabia's uncompromising stance had sent ripples through every echelon of power in the capital. I found myself amid frantic meetings in the White House, where anxious voices and determined faces filled crowded conference rooms. High-ranking officials gathered around a long, polished table, their expressions grave as they attempted to fathom the implications of Prince Faisal's stern decree. We're witnessing a historic shift, a senior diplomat declared, his voice tight with urgency. If Riyadh cements its alliances with China and Russia, our influence will crumble. His words resonated in the room as advisors exchanged worried glances. The president, his features set in a mask of controlled fury, demanded, "How did we let it come to this? We must regain our footing before it's too late." Amid heated debates, one aide insisted, "Stricter sanctions will show them we mean business," while another countered, "Secret negotiations might salvage our position without further isolation." Every suggestion was weighed, the room's tension mounting with each passing minute. Across the ocean in Riyadh, the winds of change were blowing with equal force. I managed to secure a fleeting conversation with an aide close to Prince Faisal, who spoke in a low, resolute tone. The prince has made it crystal clear, we no longer exist as subordinates. We choose our own allies now, ones that respect our sovereignty and understand our vision. His words, measured yet forceful, underscored the gravity of Riyadh's decision. News outlets in Washington exploded with headlines like "Saudi stand," "The end of an era," and "Diplomatic crisis. Can America retain its global influence?" Financial markets trembled at the prospect of a weakened dollar if Saudi Arabia shifted its oil trade to alternative currencies. A top economic advisor, speaking under hushed confidentiality, warned, should Riyadh sign an oil deal in yuan or rubles, the repercussions for our economy will be catastrophic. The urgency in his tone left no doubt. The stakes were unimaginably high. As the day unfolded, whispers of clandestine meetings between Saudi officials and envoys from China and Russia grew louder. One insider confided, "This is not merely about oil or sanctions. It's a complete realignment of global power. We are witnessing history in motion." The implication was clear. Washington's traditional dominance was under siege, and the old order was rapidly dissolving. In a subsequent emergency briefing, a senior U.S. official stated, "We are on the precipice of a new geopolitical era. The challenge is no longer if we can restore our influence, but how quickly we can adapt to this new reality." His measured words painted a picture of uncertainty and urgent resolve. As I recorded these moments, the enormity of the crisis became ever more apparent. The delicate balance of power was tilting, and every decision made in Washington now carried the potential to reshape the global order. The diplomatic showdown between Saudi Arabia and the United States had entered its most critical phase, a phase in which every conversation, every negotiation, could either restore stability or plunge the world into deeper uncertainty. With the world watching, it was clear that the final game was only just beginning, and the outcome would determine the fate of international alliances for years to come. In the wake of the dramatic exchanges and seismic shifts in global diplomacy, the tension between Washington and Riyadh reached an unprecedented climax. I found myself at the heart of the unfolding storm, documenting every charged moment as the United States scrambled to respond to Saudi Arabia's unequivocal declaration of independence. In Washington, the halls of power echoed with urgent debates and feverish strategy sessions. Senior officials gathered around polished conference tables, their voices low and intense. "We are witnessing a historic realignment," insisted one advisor, his eyes dark with concern. "If Riyadh solidifies its alliances with China and Russia, our influence in the region will vanish overnight." Another countered, "We must consider every option, from bolstering sanctions to initiating back-channel talks, lest we lose our strategic foothold entirely." Back in Riyadh, the atmosphere was markedly different. The resolute calm of Prince Faisal's court exuded a sense of inevitability. In a private discussion with a trusted aide, I learned that the prince had long prepared for this confrontation. "Our nation has grown tired of being dictated to," the aide confided. "We will no longer accept the demands of a superpower that refuses to respect our sovereignty. We are ready to forge new alliances on our own terms." His words resonated with pride and determination, underscoring a newfound confidence that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. That evening, I secured a rare interview with Ambassador Richard Hull, who now bore the heavy burden of a failed mission. Seated in a quiet, dimly lit lounge far from the political maelstrom, Hull's gaze was both reflective and resolute. "I entered that palace expecting a dialogue," he said quietly. "But what unfolded was an ultimatum. The prince's words, 'You will leave our country,' were a stark declaration that our time in Saudi Arabia has come to an end." His voice faltered momentarily before he continued. "I've spent my career upholding the values of diplomacy and mutual respect, yet today I realize that those values no longer bind us together." Meanwhile, in Washington, the media erupted with frantic coverage. Panel discussions on television and heated debates in newsrooms painted a picture of a nation caught off guard. A prominent political analyst declared on live TV, "This is not just a diplomatic spat, it's a paradigm shift." The American ability to influence global affairs is being challenged in real time. Economic experts warn that any shift away from the dollar in oil transactions could trigger market instability. One economist, in an interview that sent ripples across financial networks, remarked, "Should Saudi Arabia finalize deals in yuan or rubles, we might witness a rapid devaluation of the dollar, a scenario with catastrophic implications for our economy." In a late-night meeting at the Capitol, lawmakers weighed their options with palpable urgency. "We cannot allow our traditional alliances to disintegrate without a fight," a seasoned senator proclaimed, pounding his fist on the table. Yet, another voice cautioned, "A forceful response may only exacerbate the crisis. We must adapt our strategy to this new reality." The divide among America's leaders was stark, and every proposed measure carried the weight of potentially reshaping the global order. As dawn approached over Riyadh, the resolute silence of the palace corridors spoke volumes. Prince Faisal, ever the enigmatic figure, had already set his plans in motion. His recent phone conversation with the U.S. president, a terse, controlled exchange, had been the final note in a symphony of defiance. "Dialogue, on our terms." His words had echoed, leaving no doubt that Saudi Arabia would no longer be beholden to external pressure. Standing on a balcony overlooking the glittering cityscape of Riyadh, I felt the magnitude of what was unfolding. The final game was in motion, and the stakes were nothing less than the future balance of power in the world. Every decision made in Washington, every measured word from Riyadh, would reverberate through history. In that charged moment, as the world watched with bated breath, it became clear that we were witnessing the end of an era and the uncertain dawn of a new geopolitical order. Expert commentary. In the midst of the escalating diplomatic crisis, several seasoned experts have weighed in on the unfolding events, offering insights into what this shift could mean for global politics and the future of U.S.-Saudi relations. Dr. Emily Carter, international relations professor. This situation marks a significant turning point. Saudi Arabia's decision to expel Ambassador Hall is not merely a symbolic gesture. It represents a clear assertion of sovereignty and a rejection of American unilateral pressure. We are witnessing the emergence of a multipolar world where traditional alliances are being questioned and new partnerships with China and Russia are becoming more influential. James Patel, geopolitical analyst. The repercussions of this diplomatic rebuke could be profound. The economic stakes are incredibly high, especially if Riyadh transitions to oil trade in currencies like the yuan or ruble. This move could undermine the US dollar status as the global reserve currency and force Washington to rethink its strategic approach in the region. Linda Rodriguez, former diplomat. What we are observing is a dramatic rebalancing of power. The US has long enjoyed a dominant role in Middle Eastern affairs, but Saudi Arabia is sending a powerful message. They're no longer willing to be dictated to. The prince's unequivocal stance and the subsequent fallout demonstrates that American influence is not absolute. Washington must now engage with Saudi Arabia as an equal partner rather than a subordinate ally. Mark Thompson, energy market expert. From an economic perspective, the potential shift away from trading oil in dollars is a game changer. If Riyadh finalizes agreements with China or Russia, we could see significant volatility in global energy markets. The domino effect on the U.S. economy, particularly the depreciation of the dollar, cannot be underestimated. Sarah Lee, strategic policy advisor. The internal debates within Washington reflect a growing sense of urgency and uncertainty. Policymakers are now grappling with the realization that the old methods of economic pressure and diplomatic coercion may no longer be effective. This crisis demands innovative strategies and a willingness to adapt to a new geopolitical landscape where respect for national sovereignty takes center stage. These expert perspectives underscore the gravity of the situation. The expulsion of Ambassador Hall and the ensuing diplomatic fallout are not isolated events. They're the harbingers of a broader realignment in global power dynamics. As both sides brace for the next moves in this high-stakes chess game, one thing is clear. The world is on the brink of a new era in international relations, where the rules are being rewritten and old certainties are rapidly giving way to emerging realities.